We will read that here, presently. But before we begin with the reading, we'll start with a word of prayer. So if you would pray with me, please. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We thank you for this world that you have made. We thank you for the lives that we have, the opportunity that we have to exist and to know one another and to know you, Father. We are grateful that you have revealed yourself to us through your word and through your creation. And we ask that you would bless us at this time as we study your word, study the things that you have given to people to write down, and ask that you would bless us as we do so that we may better understand it, that we may better understand you and your will for our lives, and that we may be strengthened, Father, to do your will better than we have before. We are grateful for these opportunities. We are grateful for the things that you have blessed us with and given to us. And Father, we are most thankful and grateful that you sent your Son, Jesus, to be a sacrifice on our behalf and to redeem us. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. All right, so I'm going to give this a go here. I am working with a little bit different technology than before, so hopefully this works out fine. If anybody has any problems, flag me down and we'll just deal with it in the moment. So Psalm 57, for the chief musician, Altasheth, of David, a Michtam, when he fled from Saul into a cave. Be gracious to me, O God, be gracious to me, for in you my soul takes refuge, and in the shadow of your wings will I take refuge, until these calamities pass over. I will cry out to God Most High, to God who performs all things for me. He will send from the heavens and save me, when he who would swallow me up reproaches. God will send forth his loving kindness and his truth. My soul is among lions. I lie among those who are set on fire, even the sons of men. Their teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue a sharp sword. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have dug a pit before me. They have fallen into its midst themselves. My heart is fixed, O God. My heart is fixed. I will sing. Praises. Awake, God, my glory. Awake, psaltery and harp. I myself will awake right early. I will give thanks to you among the peoples, O Lord. I will sing praises unto you among the nations. For your loving kindness is great to the heavens, and your truth to the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. All right. The first question, as always, what is this psalm about? Yeah, it's certainly a prayer or a speaking to God, right? And it is filled largely with expressions of that faith and confidence. This is, among people that do this kind of scholarly work and try and classify and sort the Psalms into categories, this is actually classed as a lament, as a matter of fact. And I can see that. There are certain sections in here that kind of qualify as this. He speaks of having a disaster in the first verse, right? He speaks of those that are trying to consume him in a figurative language in verse 4, right? Teeth as spears and so forth. But most of this is emphasizing praise for God, really. There's more of that than of the lamenting portion, which is an interesting way of having this. Usually the balance is a little bit more the other way. That when we read through a psalm of lament, there's a lot more given over to the problems, given over to the trials, given sometimes even to very specific things that are going on in the psalmist's life. And then at the end, or perhaps in the middle and then again at the end, there is a section where the psalmist expresses confidence that God will in fact rescue, that God will save. Whereas in this psalm, there's much more about the actual rescuing and saving than there normally would be. We have some of that in the second half of verse 1, in verse 2, in verse 3. I mean, it continues on throughout the whole psalm, and it is much more mixed through. So it's an interesting way of thinking of a lament, in that the emphasis in this case is actually not so much on the lamenting. In the introduction, the superscription here, there's a phrase, do not destroy. It's just given in isolation. And this phrase itself is going to show up again in the superscription to Psalm 58 and in Psalm 59. And a lot of Bibles, for example, the NIV that I have right here, has in the superscription above the psalm, to the tune of do not destroy. Well, if your Bible's anything like my Bible, there's these interesting little, I should know the word for this, but I don't. They're not full brackets, they're like the half brackets at the bottom of the phrase, but it's set off. It has punctuation around that. And what that means is this phrase does not actually appear in the text. It doesn't say to the tune of, it just says do not destroy. For the director of music, do not destroy of David. And so there's some debate about what that might actually mean. Most people think it refers to something musical or something lyrical, right? Something having to do with the song itself as an instruction. But there are other possibilities, right? That this could actually be a reference to a particular part of worship, right? A part of a particular ceremony where this song is intended to be used in that moment or at that point. And for example, you might think of the fact that we do an elder's prayer, right? That you could write that into something as a note, and everybody in here would understand that from context. You wouldn't have to say, for the moment when we do the elder's prayer, you could just write elder's prayer as a shorthand, and people would understand, oh, this is for that time. When I went to church in Bellevue, I don't know if they still do this, they probably do, they had a prayer for missions specifically. They had someone pray specifically for the missionary work that was being done. And if you're not familiar with that moment, seeing that as a note appended somewhere could throw you off. And so in this case, it may be a song, it may be a particular tune, but it could be something else, right? A particular point in worship or in a temple service where there is an imploring to God that he save them as a regular part of their worship. It's impossible to know for sure exactly what they're meaning with this. The cave is also a little bit nonspecific. David fled to a cave to escape Saul on at least 2 occasions. And this is nonspecific about exactly which one it was. They're mentioned in 1 Samuel 22 and 1 Samuel 24. We won't necessarily go and look at those in specifics, but they're there to be read. And these stories are slightly different in terms of their outcome, exactly what happens. But in both cases, David is being pursued by someone who is out to get him. And the superscription here as well, as in many cases, is really, the only indication of David being the author. There's nothing internal to it that speaks specifically of David, specifically of Saul. Is this important? Is this significant? We've talked about this before, but it's probably time to revisit this. Does it matter that there's nothing inside the psalm itself? And if so, how much does it matter? Yeah.
I don't think it matters because I think David is trying to write these psalms not only his own personal expression of his own feelings and needs and wants, but he wrote it kind of anonymously or open so that it could be applied to other people. People could hear it and take that song and, yeah, that's me in this situation, and feel the same resonance with God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it certainly allows for a broader use when we don't make it specific in a very particular way to our own lives. But even when we do, it still can be done that way. Does it matter if we run into people that don't think that David was actually the author here? I don't think I mentioned it later on, but there's a couple of uses of language in here. There's a reference to God as the Most High and some other phrases that are typical of later language that was used and more popular, more common, closer to the time of the exile, so hundreds of years after the life of David. And as I said before, right, the phrase at the beginning, of David, is easily understood as meaning in the style of David, right? That I am writing a psalm in the way that David wrote psalms, even if I myself am not David. Right? We could write a song, we have the difference between the modern hymns, right? The modern songs that we sing in worship, and you can go back and you can look at the ones that are very old, right? Sometimes Beethoven is writing melodies that were being used. So hundreds of years difference. And you could write one in that older style, but it would still be brand new. Does it matter if David is not the author here, even at all? Yeah, I don't think that it is. I don't think that it is specifically relevant. It's important to understand what it is that the text is actually saying, and to not be dogmatic about things that are beyond what is actually here. Right? It doesn't actually say, in so many words, that David wrote this psalm. Now, if it said that, I would die on that hill, sure. Right? Somebody wants to come along and try and argue with me that David did not in fact write it if it says it right out. But it doesn't say that. It says it's of David. Now, that might mean David wrote it, and I'm perfectly willing to believe that David did. But I don't mind if somebody disagrees, because it's not that important. It's not that important. The content of this psalm and the truths that it speaks to us about the nature of God and who God is and what God does and how our lives will relate to him are true whether David wrote it or somebody imitating David, because he thought David was great, wrote it a couple hundred years later. Both work. In the same way that I could write that's a bad example. I couldn't write a song. But someone could write a song now, right? Imitating that more high classical style that you see in the hymns by Bach or Beethoven or Schubert or whoever, as a way of paying homage to people that they really liked, whose musical genius they were impressed with, and then writing lyrics to it that speak about the love of God, and that those words will be just as true. Even if at some point in the far future, people got confused. Maybe you wrote such a great song that people are like, well, maybe this is a Beethoven thing. Wouldn't that be something? But it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter for the person sitting in the chair or the pew on a Sunday morning singing it, because we're not here to think about when we're praising God, when we're praying to God, who it was that is getting the credit for putting these words on paper. Right? It's intended to be an aid, a help, an insight into our own relationship between us and God, and to help that bond between us. And whether David wrote it or someone else later in imitation of David, it's really probably not consequential. If the text doesn't say it for sure, we don't have to be dogmatic about it one way or the other. This psalm has an interesting use of language. I'll try and, as I always do, keep this to a minimum. There's a repetition of words, and different translations render this in different ways. The repetition of words takes place in 4 different verses, 1, 3, 7, and 8. The technical Greek term for this rhetorical method is epizeuxis, which is not on the test, don't worry. So we'll see this, for example, in the very first verse. He says, "Have mercy on me, O God, have mercy on me." And this is a literal repetition of words, broken with that interjection or that appeal to God, the addressing of God. Why would they do this? Why would the psalmist write in this way? Yeah.
Well, because he's really serious.
Okay.
He wants to really get the point out to God. Please help me, have mercy on me, please.
Okay, as an indication of his seriousness. Sure. the reasons are there to repeat these things?
Could possibly just be a poetic choice.
Yeah, a poetic choice because these sort of repeated words in the right context is, and I love this word so I'm going to use it, is mellifluous to the human ear. It sounds lovely sometimes, right? That beyond the simple emphasis, the emphasis by using the same words again can sound really nice. Yeah. It can also be an emphasis, not just of our own seriousness, right, that I am being forthright, but the extremity of the need, right? When you want something really badly, right, you have a small child who's desperate to, have some candy, watch some television, whatever it is, do they leave you alone? Do they keep repeating that same question that they've already gotten an answer to? Yes, they do. Yes, they do. Over and over again. People who are drowning, people who are in danger, don't shout once, and when they see you turn, they're like, okay, good, you heard me. I can stop now. Right? You say it again. You don't want to leave any doubts. You want to be sure. You want to be very clear. The extremity of your need causes you to repeat yourself. And so all of these are good reasons to have this done in this particular psalm. Yeah. And we're going to see this again. He does this in several places where he repeats the same words over and over. Be gracious is repeated, I just said this, to express the depth of the psalmist's need. There's a similar reference. This is the second half of verse 1. I should have made that note clearer for myself and for everyone else. There's a taking refuge in the shadow of your wings. Does anybody remember this from the Gospels when Jesus says a similar sort of phrase? Is this ringing a bell? I see one nod, a couple nodded heads, several nodded heads. Yeah, it's in a couple places in a couple of the Gospels. He speaks, Jesus, speaking of Jerusalem, figuratively, therefore, of the people of Israel, of Jews writ large, of being a mother hen who longs to gather her chicks under her wings. Right? It's this similar sort of metaphor, just kind of from the other direction. Right? That this, in this case, the psalmist is speaking of the desire to take refuge under the wings of God. Not that God has literal wings, not that God is an animal, right? These are figurative words indicating the desire to be safe, right? Taking an image that everyone would know well of that gathering and protecting under the shadow of wings, the hiding away. And Jesus uses that in reverse as the one who wishes to do the protecting. He wants the people of Israel to do as the psalmist does here and go to him for protection, go to him for salvation, go to him for refuge. I don't think it is, there's so many messianic references in the Psalms, I don't think it's probably a coincidence that Jesus at some point in the Gospels, at some point in his ministry, uses this metaphor, right? Reversing the direction of the operation. People, the psalmist, longing to be under the protection of God. God, in fact, wishes us to come to him for protection, for salvation. The title in 2, we talked about this a moment ago, Most High, being typical of later kind of literature, is an emphasis on the supreme and exalted nature of God. Why would this be an important thing to put into this kind of literature, into a psalm? Why emphasize this about God? If this is used in temple worship, everybody in the temple should know this. We're certainly not telling God anything new. I got a lot of stumpers this morning. This is good. Good stuff. You guys got out of the habit. 2 weeks of singing. Let's say not 2 weeks of singing. 1 week of singing and 1 week of Mountain States Children Bell. But the Israelites didn't live in the same sort of world that we live in. Right? If you were to look at the predominant religion Maybe we're just a plurality at this point instead of a full majority, but for a long time, Western countries have had Christianity be the dominant religion. And what are the choices? It's Christianity or nothing for a long time. And even when there are other religions that have prominence and notice, they are very, very similar in their conception of the cosmos. Now, I'm not saying that they are similar in the way they think of God, but in thinking of there being a monotheistic creator over all the world. Judaism is very, very similar, obviously. Christianity is, in some sense, very closely related. But even Islam, a monotheistic creator who reigns over all the universe. But in other parts of the world, a lot of Asia and India, parts of Africa, and the area all around Israel, they lived in a pagan, polytheistic culture. They were everywhere. And the idea of there being a God of Israel was not shocking to anyone. They didn't argue about whether or not Israel's God was real. They argued about whether or not Israel's God was primary. They would have disagreed with Israel about their God being the Most High God. Even if you assign any sort of realism to the gods that they worshipped, being demonic forces, evil spirits, as they may well have been, right? The Baals, Molech, these terrible, terrible gods and the peoples around them. One of the things to emphasize to the people of Israel as a reminder, and to the other people that may hear these words, is that Israel's God is supreme. Israel's God reigns over all of them. Israel's God is the true God who is the Most High God. And as a reminder, particularly if this is used once they go into exile, when they are truly and well surrounded by a pagan culture in Babylon, this reminder that Jehovah is the high, true God would have been a particularly important and useful reminder. In verse 3, there is a phrase, he puts shame to my oppressor. This is translated in several different ways. In the NIV we have rebuking those who hotly pursue me. Right, this is in the middle of that verse. This is the only instance of this phrase. It only occurs here in this psalm. And it is not easily understood. I have a second note. Yeah. The King James and the American Standard rendered as the oppressor reproaching the psalmist. That is to say, the oppressor is reproaching the person writing, trying to bring shame to him. The NIV and the English Standard Version, most others, have this as God reproaching the person who is oppressing the psalmist. That is to say, God is rebuking those that would try to do evil to the person writing. There's not a clear consensus on the meaning of this because there is no other instance of this context that we can use to derive from this. Does this in any way materially alter the understanding of this psalm? He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends his love and faithfulness. If we were to change that, again, that's the NIV, so that the oppressor sends from heaven and saves me, he puts to shame my oppressor. All right, I want to get beyond verse 3, so I'm going to answer for you. Oh, yes, ma'am, please, please.
It's not going to change the good news.
No, I don't think it matters one whit. I don't think it matters at all. Because we can see from the phrases around it what the point of this verse is. It's clear. God is saving the psalmist. God is loving and faithful. God is there in your time of need. And whether we understand that phrase to mean that God is rebuking the person who oppresses him, or that God is loving and faithful and will save, because this person is oppressing and rebuking him, the meaning of that verse doesn't actually change. And what you'll find when you do a lot of these, you see these lists online or wherever about people talking about biblical contradictions or how people don't understand the Bible, and they put stuff like this in there. It doesn't actually change the meaning of what's going on. It doesn't change the meaning of this psalm or even of this verse, even though we don't know exactly which way to put that subject, object, verb kind of arrangement. All right. Older translations, by which I mean translations like the King James and the American Standard, tend to render verse 4 more literally with a reference to fire. I don't know if you noticed this in the reading. I don't have my other book with me at the moment to flip back to it, but there was a phrase in verse 4 speaking of those who are on fire. Here in the line that in the NIV is ravenous beasts. This is because the word here for ravenous in the NIV, to consume, is a word literally used of fire. And the same word was used a little bit confusingly in both contexts. It meant a fire that burned and consumed, and you would also use it when you talked about a person or an animal or somebody else being hungry and consuming something entirely. It went both ways. And this becomes a difficult verse then, a little bit, because the next few verses, or the next few, excuse me, not verses, the next few lines speak of teeth and tongues. And so is this a reference? Not to fire, but to actual animals? What kind of metaphor are we dealing with here? On the other hand, the whole thing is metaphorical. Why could not a fire have teeth like spears? And just carry your metaphor a little farther. The fire that eats and consumes. This is one of the Psalms that has the most linguistic footnotes of any that I've come across so far. Just these curious ways of doing it. This could also as well be a deliberate kind of thing. When you write poetry, when you write these kinds of things, layering meaning, double and triple meaning within your words can often be a sign of your skill as a poet. If you understood this, as the writer writing in Hebrew undoubtedly would have about this word, this becomes then perhaps a deliberate word choice to evoke multiple images within the mind of the person who is reading, singing, hearing this song. The danger is like that of lions, it is like that of fire, it is like the same as if men were around you with teeth that were sharp as swords. And with just a very few words, he is able to layer all of these images and meanings into the same verse. I would argue it's a mark of skill rather than of confusion here. And I just said this without moving the notes. Sense of devouring, subsequent mentions of teeth and tongue. In either way, it's danger. It's danger. The meaning of the psalm, of the verse, is clear. The peril is immediate. The peril is severe. The peril is of death. Is there something else, though, that might be conveyed by references to teeth and tongue? What other kind of imagery or metaphor is this, potentially?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy? Possibly. Yeah, I think you're on the right track, certainly. What's the other big metaphor, place where we use a metaphor using the tongue that everybody thinks of in the Bible? How can harm? Yeah? Harm in what way? Right? Like I can't actually injure anybody with my tongue, really. Not physically. It's not very dangerous. But
Cursing.
Yeah, the words that we speak. Yeah, the cursing or the things that we say. And blasphemy is more against the God and the person who's saying it.
Right, not against the person.
Yeah, which is why I mean, it's the right track. But it's possible that there are people who are slandering him, people who are saying bad things about him, spreading lies and rumors. This is the other way. This is the metaphor that James uses, right? He speaks of the tongue doing all these things, when really, what is that? It's a metaphor for the things that we say about other people, the way that we speak, the words that we use, and the choices that we make when we're talking. And this sort of thing could, again, be a further layered metaphor for this danger, the consumption, and it's coming from the things that people say about him, the way people are talking about him, the bad report that he is getting. Yeah. All right. 5. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth. Why throw that in there? Why tell God to be exalted? Is God not already exalted? Above the heavens, let your glory be. Is his glory not over all the earth? What's the point? It's just simply another way to say or to glorify God, yeah, to speak of his glory and to add to it by our own praise. Sure, yeah.
Because we're supposed to pray, we're supposed to glorify him. If we don't have that in our beliefs, Christian beliefs, what's the point?
Sure. We're instructed to do things like this, certainly. Right.
It's like a marriage, and you don't have communication, so you just keep riding along without any communication throughout all those years. But that's without prayer, with you and God.
Sure. It helps it keeps that relationship, right? That communication with God is part of having a relationship. We're not just simply creatures that he has made, merely subjects. We are those things, but we are more than that. He adopts us as children and cares for us like a father. Yeah. Yeah. Why else? Anything else? It's not just the things that we say to God as well. There's another part of this as a song or a psalm that is done corporately, which is the audience of the people around us. And again, further, within their context, the world around them. Right? The assertion of God's control. Right? The proclaiming to the world of who God is. Right? And the agreement that we have that he should continue to be so. That he will continue to reign over all the earth. That he will continue to be glorified above everyone else. This saying of it publicly is another element to it where we make known who we are, where we stand, and what we believe about God, who God is to us. It's a public assertion of our faith. Right? We can certainly believe all these things and never say them, but that's different than being willing to make that known publicly. Six, this is the part of the lament here, acknowledges his troubles, but it's still confident. Unlike a lot of other lament psalms, there isn't necessarily even a whole lot of time spent on these problems. He has this in verse 4, but it's just the one verse. 3 has the mixture of the two things, and 6 does the same as well. They spread a net for my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path. But even at the end of the verse, but they have fallen into it themselves. This is the most confident and upbeat lament that I, again, have run across to this point. When you really take a look at it, he's not really that worried, it doesn't feel like, when you go through it. Every moment he starts to feel a little bit down, like, oh, there's some problems, he bounces right back. All right. Repeats his devotion. We've reached 7. This is another one of those instances with the repeated words. My heart is steadfast, O God, my heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Why repeat this phrase? So before, have mercy on me, distress, need, danger, right? The repeated words emphasize this. But this isn't a plea for help. This is different. He's talking now about what he is going to do. Yeah.
To build himself up.
Okay. Yeah. Build that self-confidence, perhaps? Sure. We do this. You give yourself that positive pep talk sometimes. You got something, big presentation, you're before playing the big game, you're like, you can do this, right? You can do this. You can do this. You get out there and you just do it. Why else though? He's emphasizing his faithfulness to God. By repeating it, he is trying to indicate the depth of his faithfulness. Maybe for himself, maybe to tell God as a part of our communication, perhaps for the others around him. To emphasize that whatever the difficulty, whatever the problem, however severe it gets, as we see in the first few verses, have mercy on me repeated. Here, he repeats that he will be steadfast, that he will remain faithful. And the repetition in the same words drives home this point. Regardless, no matter what, faithfulness will remain. I'm sorry, did you?
No, you answered.
Okay. All right, I have reached my time. That's not bad. 7 verses. We got through 7 verses. Anything that I haven't reached yet? Anybody wanted to comment on or ask about? Anything I moved past too quickly that we need to go back and talk about? No? All right. Well, I'm going to seize the moment here that I have a microphone. There was some conversation about worship service, and Steve can tell me if I'm off base on this, I'm sure, that if you're going to be serving in worship this morning, instead of kind of meeting in the back or in the, we're going to meet down front about 5 minutes before service starts. So if your name's on the list to do something this morning, just bear that in mind. But with that one announcement, I will be done, and thank you all very much for your time. Appreciate it.